pirates invented the first workers' compensation system 200 years before modern corporations. Lost an eye? Here's your payout. Lost a leg? Even more gold. While the world calls them lawless criminals, they were secretly pioneers of something shocking. What other impossible contradictions are hiding? Forget everything you think you know about pirates being lawless savages ruling through fear and brutality. The truth? These seafaring rebels created one of history's most advanced democratic systems, centuries before most countries figured it out. Picture this. While kings ruled with iron fists and common sailors got whipped for looking sideways at an officer, pirate crews were literally voting on everything. Where to sail next, how to split the loot, even whether their captain deserved to keep his job. Makes modern office politics look tame, right? Here's the kicker. Roughly 75% of pirate ships operated this way. Every major decision went to a vote. Captain acting like a tyrant? Out he goes. Crew members had more say in their daily lives than sailors in any Royal Navy, but their voting system had some seriously weird rules that'll surprise you. Pirates weren't just lawless rebels sailing around causing chaos. They actually followed stricter rules than most people today follow at their jobs. These weren't suggestions either. Break the code, and you might find yourself marooned on a deserted island with nothing but a pistol and one shot. Each ship had its own articles, basically a detailed contract everyone signed before joining the crew. Think of it like terms of service, except people actually read these because their lives depended on it. The code covered everything from how loot got divided to what happened if you lost a limb in battle. Yes, there was workers' compensation for pirates. Most codes guaranteed equal votes for all crew members and fair shares of treasure. Some even included rules about lights-out times and keeping weapons clean. Breaking these sacred rules could mean death, but following them meant survival and respect among the most dangerous men on the seas. But here's where things get really interesting about pirate gear. Pirates didn't wear eye patches because they lost an eye in some dramatic sword fight. That's Hollywood nonsense. The real reason? Pure genius. See, when you're below deck, it's darker than a tax collector's heart. But above deck, the Caribbean sun could blind you faster than you could say, "Shiver me timbers." So pirates kept one eye covered with a patch to stay adjusted to darkness. When they needed to go below deck quickly during battle, they'd flip the patch to the other eye. Instant night vision. Think about it. If you're 60 years old and still fumbling for the light switch at night, these guys had it figured out 300 years ago. About half of all privateers use this trick. Smart, right? But here's what gets even weirder. Those famous wooden legs weren't always what you'd expect either. Pirates with wooden legs and hook hands weren't just Hollywood fantasy. These makeshift prosthetics were surprisingly common among real sea rovers. When a cannonball took your leg or a cutlass severed your hand, you had two choices: retire to begging on some dock or get creative with carpentry. Most pirates chose option 2. Ship carpenters became amateur prosthetic makers, crafting crude but functional replacements from whatever materials they had. A wooden peg leg? Better than no leg at all. A hook hand? Still useful for grabbing rigging or intimidating enemies during negotiations. But here's the kicker. Some pirates actually preferred their replacements. Peg legs never got tired, and hooks made excellent weapons in close combat. Talk about making lemonade from life's worst lemons. These improvised limbs became badges of honor, proving you'd survived what killed lesser men. Speaking of survival tactics, pirates had another clever trick that most people completely misunderstand about eye patches. Edward Teach knew something most pirates didn't grasp. Fear was worth more than any cannon. Blackbeard would literally set his beard on fire before battles. Well, not exactly on fire. He'd weave hemp and slow matches into his thick black whiskers, then light them during combat. Picture walking into a bar and the bouncer's face is literally smoking. You'd probably order a soda and leave quietly, right? The psychological warfare worked like a charm. Enemy ships would surrender before the first shot was fired. Why risk death fighting a demon who looked like he crawled straight out of hell? Blackbeard understood that reputation could win battles faster than superior firepower. Other pirates copied his intimidation tactics, but none matched his theatrical flair. His smoking beard became so legendary that victims would describe seeing the devil himself approaching their vessel. But even the most fearsome appearance couldn't save him from what every pirate feared most. Red flags meant no mercy would be shown. Black flags? Death was coming, but surrender might save you. Well, that's assuming you could read the symbols correctly in the heat of battle. Each pirate captain designed their own personal flag like a twisted business card. Blackbeard showed a skeleton toasting the devil himself. Talk about workplace branding. Some featured hourglasses, meaning your time was running out faster than a tax refund. Others displayed bleeding hearts or crossed swords. The famous skull and crossbones? That was actually pretty rare. Most pirates preferred more creative threats. Think of it as medieval emoji, except these emojis could get you killed. Pirates spent serious money on these flags too, hiring artists and using expensive dyes. But here's the clever part. Many crews carried multiple flags for different occasions. Speaking of creative tactics, wait until you hear about the legendary female pirates who fooled entire navies. Anne Bonny and Mary Read weren't your typical 18th century ladies sipping tea and embroidering doilies. These women commanded pirate ships with more authority than most men could muster at a church potluck. Both disguised themselves as men initially because apparently the only thing more shocking than a pirate back then was a woman who wanted to do something interesting with her life. Mary Read had been dressing as a boy since childhood, while Anne Bonny simply decided that skirts weren't practical for sword fighting. Here's the kicker. They were genuinely successful pirates. Not token crew members or romantic accessories, actual leaders who earned respect through skill and ruthlessness. When their crew was captured, historical records show the two women fought harder than anyone else, while the men cowered below deck. But their stories reveal something unexpected about pirate society that most people never consider. These weren't just random hideouts. They were full-blown pirate cities with their own twisted rules. Tortuga became so notorious that Spanish forces attacked it multiple times. Yet pirates kept coming back like stubborn houseguests who refused to leave. Port Royal? Well, that place was basically Las Vegas meets the Wild West, but with more rum and fewer safety regulations. Pirates would blow their entire fortunes in weeks on gambling, drinking, and questionable entertainment. The irony? This den of sin got wiped out by an earthquake in 1692. Talk about divine intervention with perfect timing. Nassau operated under what you might call organized chaos. Pirates elected their own unofficial governors and created a functioning society that would make modern anarchists weep with joy. These havens weren't just safe harbors. They were proof that pirates could build entire communities when they weren't busy stealing from everyone else. But what made their ships so perfect for this lifestyle of organized mayhem? Pirates didn't exactly walk into a shipyard and order their dream vessel. Nope. They were basically the ultimate car thieves of the sea, stealing whatever floated and looked fast enough to outrun the authorities. Speed trumped everything else. A massive warship might look impressive, but good luck escaping when the Royal Navy shows up for tea and cannons. Pirates preferred nimble frigates and sloops. Think sports cars versus tanks. These ships could zip through shallow waters where bigger vessels got stuck, like your uncle trying to squeeze into his college jeans. But here's the kicker. Pirate ships were often more comfortable than official Navy vessels. While naval crews dealt with rigid discipline and terrible conditions, pirates actually cared about crew morale. Makes sense, right? Happy pirates meant fewer mutinies. Their ships needed constant repairs, though, because intensive raiding wasn't exactly gentle on the hull, but that mobility, that was their ticket to freedom and fortune on the high seas. Contrary to every pirate movie you've ever watched, buried treasure was about as common as a pirate using sunscreen. Most pirates blew through their loot faster than a teenager with their first credit card. Think about it logically. You've just risked your neck capturing a Spanish galleon, survived cannon fire, and grabbed chests of gold. Are you really going to bury it on some random beach and draw a cute little map? Not a chance. These guys hit the nearest port and lived like kings until the money ran out. The whole treasure map thing? Pure Hollywood nonsense. Real pirates spent their cash on rum, women, and more rum. Within weeks of a successful raid, most crews were broker than a church mouse. Captain Kidd buried one stash, and suddenly every pirate in history became a landscaping enthusiast. But speaking of things pirates actually did obsess over, let's talk about their liquid currency. Rum wasn't just a drink for pirates, it was practically medicine. Water on ships turned nasty faster than a sailor could say scurvy, So rum became the safer choice. Smart thinking, right? But here's the kicker. Pirates didn't just sip it politely. They created grog by mixing rum with water and sugar, making it last longer while keeping everyone reasonably functional. Well, most of the time, the stuff bonded crews together during those endless nights at sea. Nothing says we're in this together like sharing a bottle under the stars. Of course, it also led to spectacular fights and some truly terrible decision-making. Pirates accepted this trade-off because, let's face it, life was already pretty risky. Captains had to walk a fine line. Too little alcohol and the crew got grumpy. Too much and nobody could sail straight. Speaking of keeping crews happy, wait until you hear about their brutal punishment methods. Breaking the pirate code wasn't just frowned upon, it could literally kill you. And we're not talking about a stern talking to from the captain. Keel hauling was the maritime equivalent of medieval torture. They'd tie you to a rope, drag you under the ship's barnacle-covered hull, and pull you up the other side. If the razor-sharp barnacles didn't shred you to ribbons, drowning might finish the job. It's like being dragged across the world's deadliest cheese grater while holding your breath. Marooning was almost worse. Picture being left on a tiny island with nothing but a pistol, one bullet, and a bottle of water. The pistol wasn't for hunting, it was for when you couldn't take it anymore. Then there was walking the plank. Though historians debate whether pirates actually used this method, but here's what's fascinating about these brutal punishments. Pirates ate like they were permanently camping, and not the fun kind with s'mores. Their daily menu, hardtack biscuits so tough they could double as weapons. Seriously, these things were harder than my grandfather's opinions about modern music. Fresh food spoiled faster than a politician's promise. So pirates relied on salted pork, dried beans, and whatever fish they could catch. Scurvy became their unwelcome shipmate due to zero vitamin C. Their gums bled, teeth fell out, and wounds wouldn't heal. But here's the kicker. They raided coastal towns specifically for fresh supplies. Imagine being so desperate for an apple that you'd attack a village for it. Large stocks of rum helped mask the bland, repetitive meals. It was basically medieval meal replacement therapy. However, this monotonous diet reveals something fascinating about pirate weaponry that most people never consider. Pirates didn't just chase individual ships like some maritime game of tag. They were smarter than that, much smarter. Blockades became their weapon of choice for controlling entire trade routes. Think of it like setting up a toll booth, except the toll collectors had cannons and absolutely no customer service training. Caribbean pirates would position themselves at narrow passages between islands. Ships had nowhere to run. Brilliant, really. These operations required serious coordination, multiple ships, strategic positioning, and the patience of a chess master. Pirates had to wait days, sometimes weeks, for the perfect convoy to sail into their trap. But here's what made blockades truly devastating. They didn't just capture one ship's cargo. They grabbed everything. Entire merchant fleets would surrender rather than face certain destruction. The economic impact was staggering. Colonial powers lost millions in disrupted trade. However, maintaining these blockades created an unexpected problem that would change pirate society forever. Pirates didn't just grunt and point at things. They developed their own elaborate language that was part necessity, part showmanship, and completely fascinating. Think about it. You're stuck on a ship with 30 other guys for months at a time. You need ways to communicate quickly during battles, secretly when planning raids, and efficiently when coordinating ship operations. So pirates created a linguistic cocktail mixing English maritime terms, Spanish phrases picked up in ports, Dutch sailing vocabulary, and pure creative cursing. Avast wasn't just pirates trying to sound cool, it meant stop what you're doing right now. Belay that meant to cancel the previous order. These weren't theatrical flourishes, they were survival tools. But here's the kicker. Most of what we think is authentic pirate speak actually comes from Hollywood writers who never stepped foot on a ship. Real pirate language was far more practical and considerably less theatrical than movies suggest. Speaking of theatrical, wait until you hear about the difference between privateers and pirates. The line between privateer and pirate, thinner than my patience during tax season. Privateers carried government-issued letters of marque, essentially permission slips to legally rob enemy ships. Pirates just skipped the paperwork entirely. But here's where it gets interesting. Many privateers turned pirate the moment their government stopped paying or supporting them. Why give up a profitable career just because some bureaucrat changed his mind? Then there's the flip side. During wartime, notorious pirates sometimes became privateers overnight. Same ships, same crews, same ruthless tactics, but suddenly they're respectable because they have official documents. The irony? A privateer attacking the wrong flag became a pirate instantly. One navigation mistake could transform a legal hero into a wanted criminal. These blurred lines created strategic opportunities that clever sea captains exploited masterfully. Speaking of strategy, let's explore what ended this golden age of maritime chaos. The golden age of piracy didn't just fade away. It got crushed like my hopes of finding decent parking at the mall during Christmas shopping. By the early 1700s, colonial powers had enough of these maritime troublemakers disrupting their precious trade routes. Naval patrols multiplied faster than rabbits in springtime. Britain, Spain, and France finally agreed on something besides hating each other. Pirates had to go. They coordinated attacks on pirate strongholds with military precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. Then, there's the executions. Public hangings became the era's version of reality television, drawing massive crowds. When Blackbeard died in 1718 and other notorious captains followed, potential pirates got the message loud and clear. But here's what's fascinating. Some of these former sea rogues didn't just disappear into thin air. Pirate crews weren't just a bunch of rowdy sailors throwing around orders like a corporate boardroom gone wrong. They had a surprisingly organized social structure that would make modern HR departments jealous. At the top sat the captain, but here's the kicker. He wasn't some untouchable king. Below him was the quartermaster, basically the ship's CEO who handled daily operations and disputes. Then came the boatswain, master gunner, and navigator. Each role had specific duties and, more importantly, specific shares of the loot. The beauty of this system? It was way more democratic than regular naval ships. Crew members actually had a voice in decisions. Compare that to Royal Navies, where sailors got flogged for sneezing wrong. Pirates understood something modern companies are still figuring out. Happy workers are productive workers. But what happened when this democratic paradise faced its greatest test at sea? Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge started life as nothing more than a French slave ship called La Concorde. But Edward Teach had bigger plans for her. After capturing this vessel off the coast of St. Vincent, he transformed it into one of history's most feared pirate flagships. Talk about a career change that would make any ship's insurance company nervous. The transformation was remarkable. Blackbeard added cannons, 40 of them, turning a cargo vessel into a floating fortress. He reinforced the hull and modified the rigging for speed and maneuverability. The ship became his personal weapon of terror across the Caribbean. Then came the mystery. In 1618, Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground near Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina. Was it an accident? Sabotage? Some historians think Blackbeard deliberately sank her to downsize his fleet. But here's where things get really interesting about pirate medical care. Pirates had to deal with gruesome injuries and zero proper medical care. We're talking about men losing limbs, getting sliced up in sword fights, and dealing with infections that could kill you faster than a cannonball. Ship surgeons were basically butchers with fancy titles. They'd amputate legs with carpenter's saws and use rum as their only anesthetic. Talk about liquid courage. These doctors learned on the job, and honestly, your survival chances were about as good as finding buried treasure. The weirdest part? Pirates often lived longer than regular sailors because their democratic system meant better food distribution. Sure, you might lose an eye, but at least you got your fair share of hardtack biscuits. Most crews carried basic surgical tools, but infection was the real killer. A simple cut could turn deadly within days. But speaking of deadly situations, pirate trials were even more brutal than their medical care. Getting caught as a pirate meant facing trial, and these weren't your typical courthouse proceedings. These trials were basically theatrical performances designed to scare the living daylights out of anyone thinking about hoisting the Jolly Roger. Picture Boston Harbor, 1704. Crowds gathered like it was the Super Bowl. Well, if the Super Bowl involved public hangings, colonial authorities turned these trials into must-see events, complete with dramatic testimonies and theatrical condemnations. Captain Kidd's trial became legendary entertainment. The courtroom packed tighter than a sardine can. Prosecutors painted pirates as society's greatest menace, while defense lawyers, when pirates could afford them, argued technicalities about privateering licenses. But here's what's fascinating. Many pirates used these trials as their final stage performance. They deliver speeches about colonial oppression and unfair treatment. Some became folk heroes right there in the dock. The sentences, always brutal, always public. But what happened during Blackbeard's crew trials revealed something unexpected about pirate loyalty. Pirates didn't just steal treasure and sail away into the sunset. They ran a sophisticated underground economy that would make modern black market dealers jealous. These sea rogues were basically floating merchants with cannons. Here's what most people miss. Captured loot. Wasn't just gold coins and jewels. Pirates grabbed everything valuable. Silk from China, spices worth their weight in silver, sugar, tobacco, and even livestock. One successful raid could net cargo worth 50,000 pounds. That's millions in today's money. But here's the clever part. Pirates couldn't exactly stroll into London's markets with stolen goods. Instead, they developed networks of corrupt merchants in places like Port Royal and Nassau. These middlemen laundered pirate loot faster than a Vegas casino counts chips. The really wild thing? Some colonial governors secretly encouraged this trade, taking hefty cuts. Speaking of complicated relationships, pirates had an even stranger connection with slavery that'll surprise you. Pirates had this twisted relationship with slavery that'll make your head spin. They'd attack slave ships one day, then use enslaved labor the next. Makes about as much sense as a chocolate teapot, right? But here's where it gets interesting. When pirates raided slave vessels, they sometimes freed the captives and offered them crew positions. Suddenly, these men found themselves with more rights on a pirate ship than they'd ever had on land. Well, that's one way to recruit. Enslaved crew members often received equal shares of loot and voting rights. Talk about a career change. Some chose the dangerous freedom of piracy over certain death and bondage. Can't blame them for rolling those dice. The whole thing mirrored society's messy attitudes toward slavery. Pirates weren't exactly moral crusaders, but their practical approach to recruitment created some surprisingly progressive crews. Speaking of unexpected relationships, wait until you hear about the honor code these supposed lawless thieves actually followed. Despite being outlaws, pirates actually lived by a surprisingly strict moral code. Yeah, you heard that right. Thieves with ethics. But here's the kicker. Their honor system often worked better than legitimate governments of the time. Pirates valued loyalty above everything else. Betray your crew? You'd find yourself marooned faster than you could say parley. They shared resources fairly, protected each other in battle, and, surprisingly, kept their word when making deals with other pirate crews. Think of it like an unspoken gentleman's agreement, except these gentlemen carried cutlasses and had questionable hygiene habits. This brotherhood mentality wasn't just feel-good nonsense either. It was pure survival strategy. Trust meant the difference between life and death on the high seas. However, this code of honor had some pretty dark exceptions that might shock you. Hollywood turned pirates into swashbuckling heartthrobs with perfect teeth and designer eye patches. The reality? These guys probably smelled worse than a fish market in August. Movies gave us talking parrots spouting wisdom and wooden legs that never splinter. But here's the thing. Most pirates kept both legs, and parrots were more likely to screech profanities learned from drunk sailors than offer philosophical advice. Then there's the peg leg myth. Sure, some pirates lost limbs, but Hollywood made it seem like every crew was half amputee, half adventure seeker. And don't get me started on those romantic sword fights. Real combat was brutal, bloody, and over quickly. Films mixed different centuries like a historical smoothie, creating characters who never could have existed. Makes you wonder what other facts we've swallowed whole, doesn't it? But speaking of truth versus fiction, you'll be shocked by how pirates actually shaped global politics. Pirates weren't just sea criminals, they were political players who could tip the balance of power between empires. When colonial tensions ran high, these maritime outlaws became unexpected allies for rebellious territories fighting against their oppressors. Take the Caribbean colonies. Many secretly welcomed pirate raids on Spanish treasure fleets because it weakened their colonial masters. Pirates like Henry Morgan even received unofficial backing from English governors who wanted to hurt Spanish interests without starting full-scale wars. Island nations played this game brilliantly. They'd offer pirates safe harbor in exchange for protection against rival powers. It was like having a navy without the expense or political complications. But here's the fascinating twist. Some pirates genuinely saw themselves as freedom fighters, not thieves. They viewed their attacks on imperial ships as striking blows against tyranny. Speaking of striking blows, one pirate's final battle would change everything forever. Blackbeard's final battle wasn't just another skirmish, it was the moment piracy's golden age began its death spiral. Picture this, November 22nd, 1718, Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina. Lieutenant Robert Maynard had been hunting Edward Teach for months. But here's the thing about Blackbeard. He wasn't going down without a fight that would make grown men wet themselves. The battle was brutal, hand-to-hand combat on slippery decks. Blackbeard took 5 pistol shots and 20 sword wounds before finally dropping dead. 20. The man was basically a walking pincushion by the end. Then comes the really twisted part. Maynard chopped off Blackbeard's head and hung it from his ship's bow like some medieval trophy. Talk about sending a message, right? Well, that gruesome display worked. Pirates across the Caribbean saw that head swinging in the breeze and thought, maybe accounting isn't such a bad career choice after all. But Blackbeard's death was just the beginning of piracy's problems. Pirates didn't just inspire treasure maps and adventure stories, they practically invented the entire literary adventure genre as we know it today. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island gave us Long John Silver, arguably literature's most famous pirate. But here's the kicker. Stevenson based his character on real pirates like Israel Hands, who actually sailed with Blackbeard. Talk about life imitating art, imitating life again. The weird part? Early pirate books were basically the tabloids of their time. Publishers in the 1600s sensationalized every detail, turning brutal criminals into romantic heroes. Makes sense, right? Death and adventure sell newspapers. These stories shaped how we see pirates more than actual history ever did. Captain Hook, Jack Sparrow, even modern pirate movies, they all trace back to these early romanticized tales. But literature wasn't the only place pirates left their mark. Some left behind actual treasure that would make any storyteller jealous. Here's where things get really interesting. The Whydah Galley holds the distinction of being the only verified pirate shipwreck ever discovered. When Captain Black Sam Bellamy's flagship sank off Cape Cod in 1717, it took with it the largest pirate treasure trove in history. But here's the kicker. This wasn't some buried chest nonsense. The ship went down with over 4 tons of gold and silver aboard. We're talking about wealth that would make a modern lottery winner weep with envy. When underwater explorer Barry Clifford found the wreck in 1984, he struck archaeological gold. Literally. The discovery included Spanish coins, jewelry, weaponry, and even the ship's bell engraved with the Whydah Galley. Makes you wonder what other treasure ships are still sitting on ocean floors, doesn't it? Speaking of sitting around, pirates had some surprisingly creative ways to pass time during those long voyages. Pirates didn't just wave swords around randomly like in movies. These guys were tactical masterminds with serious firepower. The blunderbuss was their favorite intimidation tool. Picture a medieval shotgun that could blow a hole through 3 men standing side by side. One blast could clear an entire ship's deck faster than my wife clears out a buffet line. But here's what's brilliant about pirate tactics. They rarely wanted to actually fight. Why risk getting your head chopped off when you could just scare the pants off your enemy instead? They'd fire cannons in the air, scream like banshees, and wave those massive cutlasses around. Most merchant ships surrendered before a single sword was swung. Smart strategy, really. Then there's their boarding techniques. They'd swing across on ropes, creating absolute chaos and confusion. But wait until you hear about their global reach. These weren't just Caribbean troublemakers. Piracy wasn't just a Caribbean thing. Despite what Hollywood keeps telling us, these sea wolves prowled waters from Madagascar to the South China Sea, making merchants nervous from London to Beijing. Take John Ward, an English pirate who sailed all the way to Tunisia and became so powerful, he basically ran the place. He converted to Islam and lived like a king. Talk about career pivoting. Meanwhile, Chinese pirates operated massive fleets with thousands of ships. Makes Blackbeard look like he was running a mom-and-pop operation. The Indian Ocean was crawling with pirates who targeted the incredibly rich Mughal treasure fleets. One successful raid there could net more gold than a dozen Caribbean adventures combined. Each region developed unique tactics too. Chinese pirates used junks, Mediterranean corsairs preferred galleys, and Indian Ocean raiders favored swift dhows. But here's what really connected these far-flung pirates across continents. They all shared the same basic code of survival and profit. Speaking of survival, let's talk about where these international outlaws met their maker. Execution Dock in London wasn't your typical waterfront spot. This grim stretch of the Thames became piracy's final curtain call, where captured sea rogues met their maker in front of cheering crowds. The authorities turned these hangings into full-blown entertainment spectacles. Families packed picnic lunches like they were heading to a baseball game, except the main event involved a noose and some very unfortunate pirates. Captain Kidd swung here in 1701, drawing thousands of gawkers. But here's the twisted part. They'd leave bodies hanging in chains until three tides washed over them. Talk about overkill. The rotting corpses served as maritime billboards, warning incoming sailors about piracy's occupational hazards. These public executions worked like medieval reality TV, complete with vendors selling snacks and souvenirs. The Crown understood that nothing deterred future pirates quite like watching their predecessors dangle in the breeze. Yet some pirates faced even darker fates than a simple hanging. Pirates were basically the original con artists of the high seas. They'd fly whatever flag got them closest to their target without raising suspicions. British flag 1 minute, Spanish the next. Like changing your dating profile pic depending on who you're trying to impress. This wasn't just casual deception, though. Pirates carried entire collections of national flags in their ship stores. When they spotted a merchant vessel, they'd quickly hoist the flag most likely to make that ship feel safe. A Spanish galleon? Up goes the Spanish colors. Dutch trading vessel? Out comes the Dutch flag. The really clever part was timing. Pirates would approach under friendly colors, get within cannon range, then dramatically raise their true pirate flag at the last second. Talk about a plot twist. This false flag operation gave them precious minutes of advantage before their victims could react or escape. But there's something even more twisted about pirate psychology waiting ahead. Some pirates weren't just after gold and glory. They saw themselves as freedom fighters battling corrupt empires. When Spanish galleons carried stolen Aztec treasure or British ships enforced brutal colonial taxes, these sea rebels felt justified in their actions. Take Henry Morgan. Sure, he raided Spanish settlements, but he also helped English colonies resist Spanish dominance in the Caribbean. Makes sense, right? The line between pirate and patriot got pretty blurry. Many pirates recruited from oppressed populations, escaped slaves, overtaxed colonists, sailors fleeing harsh naval conditions. They offered something revolutionary: equality and shared profits. While European powers squabbled over territory, pirates created their own floating democracies. But here's the twist. Some colonial governors secretly supported these criminals because they weakened rival nations. Politics and piracy mixed like rum and rebellion. Speaking of rebellion, even their flags told stories of defiance that went far deeper than simple skull imagery. Ever wondered why pirates sang so much? Well, those sea shanties weren't just for entertainment. They were survival tools. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. This famous song actually comes from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. But real pirates had their own versions. These weren't casual sing-alongs either. They synchronized back-breaking work like hoisting sails and hauling anchor chains. Think about it. Try lifting a 2-ton anchor without teamwork. The rhythm kept everyone pulling together, literally. One voice would call out verses while the crew responded in unison. It was like having a human metronome. But here's the twist. These songs also boosted morale during months of isolation. Imagine being stuck with the same 30 guys for half a year. You'd need something to keep spirits up too. Speaking of keeping things organized, pirates had another surprising system that most people never hear about. Ship surgeons were basically the difference between living and dying at sea. These weren't your typical doctors with fancy medical degrees. They were usually barbers, butchers, or anyone who could handle a knife without fainting. Their toolkit? A rusty saw, some needles, and gallons of rum. That's right, rum wasn't just for drinking. It was their anesthetic, antiseptic, and painkiller all rolled into one. Talk about multitasking. When a pirate got his leg mangled by a cannonball, the surgeon would literally saw it off while the patient bit down on a leather strap. The survival rate was about as good as you'd expect from medieval medicine performed in a rocking ship. But here's the thing. Experienced pirate surgeons actually had better success rates than many land-based doctors of their time. Speaking of survival, wait until you hear about the ghost ships that supposedly still haunt the seas today. Ghost ships aren't just Hollywood fiction. They're rooted in real pirate history. The Flying Dutchman legend, born from actual disappearances at sea. Pirates would vanish during storms, their ships never found, creating tales that spooked sailors for generations. These stories served a purpose beyond entertainment. Captains used ghost ship legends to keep crews in line. Disobey the code and you'll end up like the cursed crew of the Revenge. Works better than any lecture, right? But here's the twist. Some pirates deliberately spread ghost ship rumors about themselves. Nothing like being considered undead to make enemies think twice about fighting back. Smart psychological warfare, if you ask me. The most famous ghost ship sightings often occurred near former pirate strongholds. Coincidence? Hardly. These waters held real secrets, real wrecks, and very real reasons to be afraid. Speaking of real pirate combat tactics, the dramatic sword fights you see in movies, they actually came from real pirate combat techniques. When pirates boarded enemy ships, they developed a fighting style that mixed practicality with flair. The term swashbuckling literally comes from making noise by hitting your sword against your buckler shield. But here's the thing. Real pirate swordplay wasn't nearly as elegant as Hollywood makes it look. These guys were fighting for their lives on rolling, slippery ship decks. No choreographed moves here, just brutal efficiency. Pirates preferred cutlasses because they were short, sturdy, and perfect for close-quarters combat. Think of it like choosing a hammer over a screwdriver for demolition work. You want the right tool for the job. The theatrical moves we associate with swashbuckling, those came later when playwrights romanticized pirate stories for stage audiences. Well, speaking of pirate accessories that became legendary symbols, ever wonder why pirates always had parrots perched on their shoulders? Well, forget everything Hollywood taught you about chatty sidekicks giving away treasure locations. These colorful birds were actually floating bank accounts. Pirates could sell exotic parrots for massive profits in European ports. We're talking the equivalent of thousands of dollars today. Smart, right? But here's the kicker. Parrots were also living status symbols. Having one meant you'd successfully raided ships from tropical regions, like wearing a Rolex, but with more squawking and occasional profanity. The birds were surprisingly practical too. They required minimal food, entertained lonely sailors during endless voyages, and their mimicking abilities provided comic relief. Some parrots even learned to repeat navigation commands, becoming feathered first mates. Speaking of practical pirate choices, their weapon selection was equally calculated. Naval life in the 1700s was about as pleasant as a root canal performed by a drunk barber. Sailors faced brutal discipline, terrible food, and officers who treated them like disposable cargo. No wonder so many jumped ship to join pirate crews the moment they got the chance. The pay was another joke entirely. Navy sailors might wait months for wages that barely covered their basic needs. Meanwhile, pirates split treasure equally among the crew within days of capturing it. Which would you choose? But here's the kicker. Desertion rates in some naval fleets reached nearly 40% during peak piracy years. These weren't cowards running away. They were smart men choosing freedom over tyranny, fair wages over pennies, and democracy over dictatorship. However, not every deserter found the pirate paradise they expected. When pirates faced execution, their deaths became theatrical warnings that entire communities flocked to witness. Authorities deliberately made these spectacles as gruesome as possible, hanging bodies in iron cages called gibbets, often leaving them to rot for months as seabirds picked at the remains. But here's the twisted part. These morbid displays became the 18th century's version of must-see entertainment. Families packed picnic lunches, children got the day off school. Vendors sold meat pies and ale like it was a county fair. Captain Kidd's body swung in chains for 20 years at Tilbury Point. 20 years. That's longer than most people's careers these days. The authorities wanted every sailor passing by to remember what happened to pirates. Well, speaking of memorable pirates, one gentleman broke every rule about who could become a sea criminal. Most pirates came from rough backgrounds, but Stede Bonnet, This guy owned a sugar plantation in Barbados and decided piracy looked fun. Talk about a career change gone wrong. Unlike other pirates who stole their ships, Bonnet actually bought his own vessel. He paid for it with his own money. That's like buying a car to become a bank robber. The man had zero sailing experience, but figured, how hard could it be? His crew quickly realized their captain couldn't navigate worth a damn. Bonnet's first few raids were disasters. He got captured, escaped, then got caught again. The whole thing reads like a comedy of errors. Here's the kicker. He abandoned a comfortable plantation life for the gallows. Bonnet was executed in 1720, proving that money can't buy common sense or pirate skills. But speaking of pirate weapons that actually worked, cannons weren't just decorative pieces on pirate ships. They were the ultimate persuaders. Most pirate vessels carried between 8 to 40 cannons, depending on size. But here's the kicker. Pirates rarely used them to sink ships. Why destroy perfectly good loot? Instead, they'd fire warning shots or aim for the rigging to disable vessels. Smart strategy, really. Like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, except you want to keep the walnut intact for dinner later. Pirates modified their cannons for maximum intimidation factor. They'd load them with chain shot to tear through sails or grape shot that scattered like deadly confetti. The thunderous boom alone made many merchant crews surrender without a fight. Well, maintaining these iron beasts at sea was no joke either. Salt air rusted everything faster than a teenager's attention span. But when those cannons roared, even the bravest sailors knew resistance was futile. Fire wasn't just for show when pirates attacked. They turned it into a genuine weapon of war. These seafaring rebels would literally set enemy ships ablaze using improvised flamethrowers made from oil-soaked rags and metal pipes. Talk about bringing the heat to a fight. But here's the clever part. Most of the time, they didn't actually need to use it. The mere sight of flames dancing across the water was enough to make merchant crews surrender faster than a teenager apologizing after crashing dad's car. Pirates understood that fear was their most powerful ammunition. The psychological impact was devastating. Sailors knew that wooden ships and fire mixed about as well as cats and bath time. One spark in the wrong place meant certain death for everyone aboard. However, this fiery intimidation came with serious risks that would make even the boldest captain think twice. You've probably seen 100 movies where pirates bury treasure and mark it with an X on a weathered map. Well, here's the thing that'll disappoint every treasure hunter on the planet. Real pirates barely made any treasure maps at all. Think about it logically for a second. These guys were basically ancient rock stars with cutlasses. They'd capture a Spanish galleon loaded with gold, and what do you think they did? Did they carefully bury it for their retirement fund? Not a chance. They sailed straight to the nearest port and blew it all on rum, women, and more ships faster than a lottery winner at a casino. The few maps that existed were navigational charts showing trade routes and safe harbors. Pirates needed to know where to find their next target, not where they'd hidden last week's haul. But here's where it gets interesting. The lack of real treasure maps didn't stop people from making fake ones. Pirates created one of history's most unusual social experiments without even trying. While European society locked people into rigid class systems, pirate ships became floating democracies where your birth meant absolutely nothing. A former slave could become quartermaster. A nobleman's son might scrub decks alongside an escaped indentured servant. Race, class, background, irrelevant if you could fight and follow the code. This wasn't some enlightened philosophy. It was pure practicality. When you're outnumbered by enemy ships, you need every capable hand, regardless of their accent or skin color. Pirates recruited from taverns, slave ships, and naval deserters alike. Some families saw multiple generations join pirate crews, creating bizarre maritime dynasties. The irony? These outlaws offered more social mobility than most legitimate careers of their time. But speaking of supernatural beliefs, pirates had some truly bizarre superstitions that governed every aspect of their dangerous lives. Pirates lived in constant fear of the supernatural. These rough, tough sailors who'd fight anyone became trembling children when ghost stories started floating around the ship. Whistling on deck? Absolutely forbidden. It might summon storms. Women aboard? Bad luck waiting to happen. Starting a voyage on Friday? You'd have better luck trying to teach a parrot accounting. But here's the kicker. Many pirates carried lucky charms like worried grandmothers, rabbit's feet, special coins, even pieces of rope from blessed ships. Captain Kidd himself supposedly kept a silver dollar that he claimed saved his life 3 times. The irony: men who terrorized the seas were terrified of angry spirits following them. Makes sense when you think about all the enemies they'd made. Well, speaking of supernatural fears, some pirates took things even further. Grace O'Malley wasn't your typical 1600s Irish woman. While most ladies were expected to stay home and embroider, she was commanding 300 men and 40 ships across the Irish seas. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling with a cutlass. Born around 1530, Grace inherited her father's maritime business, but instead of settling for coastal trading, she turned full pirate. The woman negotiated face-to-face with Queen Elizabeth I herself. Imagine that job interview. What's fascinating is how she used traditional feminine expectations as camouflage. Enemies underestimated her because she was a woman. Big mistake. She'd appear diplomatic, then strike without warning. Grace proved that pirate leadership wasn't about physical strength, but strategic thinking and fierce determination. Her crews respected her because she earned it through results, not birthright. But she wasn't the only woman rewriting maritime rules through clever disguises. Pirates lived in constant fear of curses and bad omens. They wouldn't dare whistle on deck, believed it would summon storms stronger than their mother-in-law's disapproval. Women aboard ship? Absolutely forbidden. Not because of sexism, but because they thought it would anger Neptune himself. Black cats were actually considered good luck, unlike landlubbers who ran screaming. But killing an albatross? That was basically signing your own death warrant. Pirates would rather face the Royal Navy than deal with that curse. Then there were the rituals. Some crews buried coins under the mast for protection. Others kept lucky bones from enemies. Charming dinner conversation, right? Breaking a mirror meant 7 years of storms, not just bad hair days. These superstitions weren't just quirky habits. They governed major decisions about when to sail, which ships to attack, and even how to divide treasure. But speaking of symbols that struck fear into hearts, there's one flag that became legendary. The Jolly Roger became the ultimate symbol of rebellion. And honestly, it still makes corporate executives nervous today. But here's what most people miss. It wasn't just about looking scary. The flag served as a practical business tool, like the world's first terrifying logo. Pirates needed instant recognition at sea. No time for lengthy negotiations when you're trying to rob someone efficiently. The skull and crossbones meant surrender now or things get messy. Simple, effective, brutal marketing at its finest. What's fascinating? Each pirate crew customized their flags. Blackbeard added hourglasses. Others used bleeding hearts or skeletons holding weapons. These weren't random decorations. They were carefully crafted psychological warfare tools. Today, that simple black flag still represents freedom, adventure, and sticking it to authority. Not bad for a piece of cloth that once made grown sailors wet themselves with fear.